Good afternoon. Welcome back. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. We are so pleased that you are here. We had a very dynamic, fascinating morning this morning. Thank you. I hope you all got something to eat. I am Vince Cipolla, President of the Municipal Art Society, and now I'd like to introduce Eddie Torres, who will set the stage for our moderator and civic activism panelists today. Eddie is the Associate Director for the New York City Opportunities Fund and Innovation at the Rockefeller Foundation and oversees the Foundation's commitment to the city, including supporting arts and culture and, of course, the Jane Jacobs Medal. Eddie's work with the Rockefeller Foundation is so vital and essential to New York, and we all see the tremendous importance in continuing to build the cultural and civic sector, especially in uncertain economic times. It's also more relevant than at any other time in recent history, as New York and cities worldwide can benefit greatly from the ways in which creative and cultural entities encourage us with inventiveness and initiative. Eddie brought a great deal of experience to the Rockefeller Foundation. Prior to his current position, he was Director of External Partnerships for the New School for Design, where he cultivated and managed faculty and student design projects with outside organizations and companies. External partners Eddie has worked closely with include CARE, Kyle's, J.P. Morgan, and the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, among so many others. And before his work at Parsons, Eddie served as program coordinator for Artography, the Arts in a Changing America, a grant-making program of the Ford Foundation that supports arts organizations which, through their programming and leadership, address the shifting demographics in the United States population. We are so excited to be working with Eddie and the Rockefeller Foundation on this summit. Please welcome Eddie Torres.
Thanks. I'm actually, a part of my bio that wasn't included was that the first 8 years of my career was spent at the Bronx Council on the Arts. I'm a native Bronxite. And I can't tell you how proud I am to be from the least happy borough in all of New York City. Because if there's anything that does make a Bronxite happy, it's complaining. So, the Rockefeller Foundation's relationship with Jane Jacobs dates back to the 1950s when the foundation made a grant to the then obscure writer from Greenwich Village for the research and writing of the book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. 50 years later, Jane Jacobs' work remains one of the most influential books ever written on urban design. The Rockefeller Foundation Jane Jacobs Medal was created in 2007, shortly after the lived experience of New York City. The second award recognizes new ideas and activism toward the same end. The process of review, research, and selection of the medal recipients is administered by the Municipal Arts Society, our partner. The panel that selected this year's recipients included Rockefeller Foundation President Dr. Judith Rodin, Dean of the Tisch School of the Arts, NYU, Mary Schmidt-Campbell, David Rockefeller, Jr., and former editor of Business Week and current professor of design and innovation at Parsons, the New School for Design, Bruce Nussbaum. Past jurors have included such urban thinkers and New York City luminaries as Paul Goldberger. The Rockefeller Foundation is grateful to the hard work of the Municipal Arts Society for making the Jane Jacobs Medal happen every year. We're unspeakably proud of the Jane Jacobs Medal recipients and grateful to them for their work in making New York the greatest city in the world. I would like to now introduce MAS board member Eugenie Birch, co-director of the Penn Institute for Urban Research.
Jane Jacobs spent a good 20 or 25 years here in New York City fighting for the values that would communities of lasting value. This is what today we would call sustainable places, and that we now define as places that have three strong pillars: a strong social infrastructure, a strong economic infrastructure, and a strong environmental structure. We have with us today 5 outstanding leaders and disciples of Jane Jacobs, who collectively have probably spent about 125 years in fighting for lasting communities here in the city. And because of them, we have major improvements. For example, in Harlem, we have a water pollution control plant that has a park on top of it, a massive park on top of it. We have new parks at Harlem Piers. We have 21 schools, public schools, that are training our wonderful future leaders to become civic activists and become the people who will build our communities of lasting value. We have a Central Park that's the jewel of the world, not just New York, the world. We have a High Line that is the most spoken new invention in a city that we all love. Now, we don't exaggerate much, do we? At any rate, we do know, however, from this morning that New Yorkers, whether they're crotchety or cranky, love their city. They find it livable. This is really good news. And they find it so because of the work of our 5 leaders and many others who have made our city so brilliant. We've also heard this morning about the changing demography and how important that is to the strength of our city. So today, we've asked 5 to come tell us in a very short time. Each one is going to use 5 minutes and maybe 1 slide to tell us about their work. They're all recognized, of course, because of their achievement of being awardees of the Jane Jacobs Medal. And let me give you a little background about each one so that when they begin to speak, you'll understand the context and the background from which they're speaking. So, Peggy Shepard has successfully combined grassroots organizing, environmental justice and advocacy, and environmental health research to become a national leader in advancing the perspective of environmental justice in urban communities and to ensure the right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environments for all. She's a recipient of the 10th Annual Heinz Award for the Environment. She's the co-founder and executive director of We Act for Environmental Justice, We Act for short. It's based in West Harlem, and it has a 22-year-old history of engaging Northern Manhattan residents in community-based planning and campaigns in order to create communities of lasting value. Next to her is Richard Kahn. By the way, Peggy was the 2008 Jane Jacobs Medal. We're going in age of recipient, I think, here. And Richard Kahn, the 2009 Jane Jacobs Medal for Lifetime Leadership, is perhaps best known for his work as the founder of the Urban Assembly. And the Urban Assembly is now creating specialized schools in New York to allow children, our children, to earn college degrees and to enter that job ladder that's going to make us economically competitive. He also co-founded Take the Field to rebuild athletic fields, benefit schools and residents in our city. Richard has created public and private partnerships to solve intractable urban problems, and in his earlier career, he was chairman and CEO of the Battery Park City Authority, the New York Convention Center Development Corporation, and he was the brains, by the way, behind the Riverside South Corporation that dealt with that development. Elizabeth Barlow Rogers, the 2010 Jacobs Medal for Lifetime Leadership, is the co-founder with then Parks Commissioner Gordon Davis and Ed Koch, Mayor Ed Koch, of the Central Park Conservancy, founded in 1980. The Conservancy not only restored the park after its terrible decline, but created a model for public-private partnerships to improve urban parks worldwide, and in fact has become a model that has been replicated not only in other parts of our city, but in cities throughout the United States and throughout the world. She has pursued a nonstop love affair with garden history and landscape design, something she'll talk about today, and in forming the Cityscape Institute for the beautification of public places and the foundation for landscape studies, she's continuing an earlier thread in her life in order to blend the experiences of the past with the future. She's author of The Forest and Wetlands of New York City and Frederick Law Olmsted's New York. And then we come to the next winners. They're double winners of the Jane Jacobs Award, both Joshua David and Robert Hammond. They won for their new ideas and activism. They co-founded the Friends of the High Line when it was an elevated railway, as you all know, slated for demolition. The organization saved, their Friends of the High Line saved that linear, what is now a linear park on the west side. And Josh did have a life before the High Line, the Friends of the High Line. He was a freelance magazine writer and editor for Gourmet, Fortune, Travel and Leisure, and others. Josh has served on Community Board number 4 on the Transportation and Planning Committee and played a wonderful leadership role in advocating for the 8th Avenue bike line. Robert Hammond, the co-winner, has had a life as well before Friends of the High Line, and he started businesses and consulted with nonprofit organizations. He has been awarded the 2010 Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome. Lucky man. And he is an artist who has served as an ex officio member of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Board of Trustees. Now, we've asked them to spend a little bit of time telling you about their civic activism, because after all, that is the name of our panel today. And I was corrected by one of the panelists who said we shouldn't just be talking about civic activism, we should be talking about civic activities. And it's this collective group of civic activities that you're going to hear about today. Peggy.
Yes. So thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. You know, even though I grew up in Washington, D.C. and Trenton, New Jersey, New York City has been the only place I've ever wanted to live since I was about 12 years old, and my mother brought me to New York, to Radio City, and to shop. And so when I came to New York in the 70s as a journalist from a Midwest newspaper, I was here to fulfill my dream to be a magazine editor. I worked in publishing, then I became a speechwriter, and then I got involved with the Jesse Jackson campaign, his first campaign for president, as the public relations coordinator. And that campaign and my interaction with a diverse group of young people from around New York City really set me on a path that would change my life, my career, and my aspirations. It was my opportunity to really observe and assess the range of disparity between communities in regard to distribution of benefits and burdens, disparity in the nature and character of political and civic leadership expressed by community resilience, and great disparity in neighborhood quality of life. So under the banner of Leadership for a Change, I ran as the Democratic district leader and was elected in West Harlem back in 1985. And it was some senior citizens who told me that it was my job to begin organizing an education that would really begin to improve quality of life in West Harlem. And so just shortly after I was elected, the North River Sewage Treatment Plant went online. And it was originally sited for the Upper West Side, but the real estate lobby was able to persuade the Planning Commission to move it uptown. But its flawed operations really began to rally the community around foul odors, noxious emissions, and the impact on the respiratory health of kids. And so an effort grew from new political progressive leadership as the foundation for a struggle for environmental justice in uptown neighborhoods. So after an 8-year organizing campaign of government accountability, direct action, civil disobedience, we finally got a New York Times above the fold, 5-column headline that said Mayor Dinkins committed $55 million to fix a brand new state-of-the-art plant. There was a court mandate for a 5-year fix-up plan, and in 1993, we got a $1.1 million settlement of our lawsuit against the city for operating the plant as a private and a public nuisance. So we realized that our community was a dumping ground for the rest of Manhattan. And so we realized there was a systemic problem that we really had to develop strategies to address. So we had 3 key objectives. We wanted to force the city to fix the plant. We wanted to develop a model to engage residents in environmental policy and planning. And we wanted to get environmental justice on the city, state, and federal agenda. And we knew we needed to do several things. We needed to institutionalize advocacy in an underserved community, be a watchdog, build community assets, and express and demonstrate a community-generated vision of sustainability. So in March '88, we founded We Act. At the same time, we filed a lawsuit against the MTA to halt the development of the 6th bus depot in Harlem. We house over 1/3 of the diesel bus fleet of New York City's. We demanded an environmental impact statement for which the MTA had an exemption. But by 1990, we were organizing an environmental justice alliance here in the city, a regional environmental justice alliance, and we were engaging nationally and globally in the environmental justice movement that really challenges the disparate burden of pollution that's borne by communities of low income and communities of color. And it's really that disparate burden of benefits, investment, burdens, and access to decision making that really characterizes environmental injustice, and it's really been a contributor to serious disparities in health. And it's those dynamics that have really motivated me over the last 12 years. So over the last 12 years, we've worked as a community partner of the Columbia School of Public Health so that we could really understand the exposures that residents were experiencing and what those health outcomes were. And that research that we've been able to translate into policy and practice has helped us transform the MTA's fleet to alternative fuels and to diesel retrofits on every single bus throughout this city. So that's been a wonderful accomplishment. But what really makes me smile is walking past the new Harlem Piers. That was a 10-year effort to get the city not to put a hotel there, but to wait for a community plan and to build that plan. And 10 years later, last year, that park did open. We were also very successful in the mayor's solid waste plan saying, we have our lion's share, not the fair share. And so we were able to get him to keep the 135th Street Marine Transfer Station closed and not to expand it. And so now Community Board 9 and We Act are leading a community design charrette for the reuse of the 135th Street Transfer Station as a community facility, and that will enhance the Harlem Piers. So we've had just a variety of activism over the years. Certainly the 5-year Columbia expansion, which has led to a community benefits agreement, has been another key challenge. But basically, I think the important thing has been building democracy, building robust community engagement that really helps to build a more democratic city. And I've been really proud to have been a part in making that happen. Thank you.
That's pretty exciting. I don't know that everybody knew about the buses. That's really extraordinary. Richard, tell us about children.
These lights, I was supposed to speak to the back of the audience, but I'm not sure there's anybody there. And I'd like to have sunglasses and a bathing suit.
They're waving at you.
Okay. First, I'd like to, there was an incredible event this week, which was the Jane Jacobs Award ceremony. And I just want to recognize the incredible people who won this year, which is Betsy and Josh and Robert. The work, I just watched this thing and I thought, what an amazing amount of creativity and what an important contribution to the City of New York, permanent contribution to the City of New York. I also have to say that with the exception of Riverside South, which I thought I had successfully struck from my resume, everything I've done since 1990 would have been impossible without my partnership with one of your trustees, Tony Kaiser, who was here. So I want to recognize Tony. I would have a very short set of comments tonight if it weren't for him. Anyway, I'm going to talk about power. And there's a term in physics I've been trying to figure out all day. Some of you will remember, but it essentially is about declining, declining power, declining energy, whatever it is. And my career has basically been a fairly slow but consistent loss of power. And which doesn't mean you can't get something done. It just means you have to be a lot more creative about it. When I headed the Urban Development Corporation and Convention Center in Battery Park City, I had legislative powers that were almost unlimited. I did not have to pay, if I didn't want to, I did not have to pay attention to communities or even the city of New York, mayor, et cetera. That kind of legislation has never been created again and won't be. It was a unique set of circumstances having to do with the assassination of Martin Luther King, cities burning around the country, and a very determined governor, Nelson Rockefeller. In Bronx Center, which is a 300-block revitalization effort, which I brought 200 of my best friends into as volunteers, we all volunteered, I had only the power that was granted to me by the borough president, and that would vary day to day depending on how much he felt, how much courage he felt about supporting controversial elements of a plan. Take the field, which Tony and I were partners in. It was dependent on our relationship with the city council and with the mayor, and a lot of our power, I have to confess, came from our third partner, Bob Tisch. He could open doors and raise money in ways that we could not, and it was a private partner, in other words, that the power came from to make this possible. And I finally, in terms of the schoolwork, it's very much dependent on a good relationship with Joel Klein. Would there still be an urban assembly? Yes. Would we have 21 schools? No. Would we have a future? No. So that it is a question of doing the job well and maintaining those kinds of relationships that gives us whatever power we have to do, which is not insubstantial. And finally, down to zero. Now, the zero is a project, unfortunately, I can't tell you about yet, but it's a large project. It involves a large amount of public space in a prominent location. It involves a number of schools, including the city's first boarding school. And I have no authority, no position, nothing that says I should have anything to do with this project, except that I put forward the idea, and I'm sort of pretending and waiting for somebody to say, well, why are you here? You don't head any of these organizations. And it's starting to move, and at some point it just takes on a life of its own, and yeah, that's Richard Kahn's involved in that. But again, it comes from, eventually it has to become from substance. You can start out with a lot of power, which is granted to you. As it gets less and less, there has to be some substance. You have to have ideas that are compelling to a lot of people. And at that point, you should have a track record so that people believe, maybe this won't get done if we don't involve him. Now, at that